Ladies and gentlemen, Danny Boyle.
Hello, everyone.
Thank you for coming, Danny. And on this day that the new Pope has been announced, I think it's interesting that you started out on a career path to becoming a priest. So can you tell us about your early days when you were looking for vocation and how the priesthood's loss ended up to be movie's gain?
Yeah, no, my mum, thank you very much for being here, everyone. Thank you for coming out. Really appreciate it. My mum would have been delighted because she named me Daniel Francis Dominic Boyle, good Catholic names. And of course, we have Pope Francis, so she would have been absolutely thrilled about that. And the producer, my producer, Christian Colson, is here, and he's part Argentinian, so he's got further reason to celebrate. So, but yeah, no, I was very much. I went to a religious school, a Salesian school, and part of that was that I was going to leave at 12 and go to a seminary to start to study to be a priest. And in fact, it was a priest at the school, because we had lots of priest teachers, who took me aside. He wasn't a man I particularly liked, and I didn't feel, but he took me aside and said, I don't think you should think about the priesthood just yet. So he obviously saw something in me that was coming, that was in the mail, you know, it was due to arrive at some point. And I'm very, very grateful to him, you know, because it's true, you know, you kind of, girls start happening, and movies and music and all the kind of, and cigarettes and all those kind of things that begin to happen to you, you know, and so things turn out very differently, yeah.
You said movies started happening. Tell us how seeing Apocalypse Now changed the direction of your life.
Well, for me, it's the greatest film ever made. There's something, it's not perfect, I'm sure you can punch holes in it and all that kind of stuff, but there's something extraordinary about it. It's the purest action movie ever made. There's continual movement and then crisis, movement and crisis, movement and crisis, as well as the look at the soul of the nation, really, at that time. And it's one of those movies, I'm sure you've all got them, where you know, if it comes on the television halfway through, you stay up and it's 2 o'clock in the morning by the time it finishes, and you just can't stop watching it like that. And it's had a very, very deep impression on me. And I was very fortunate. I mean, it's weird the way it works, because I was born in 1956, so I was, when the Beatles started, I kind of, because music's very important to me, I kind of knew about them because my dad bought the records, and we've got them actually still, the original singles. But yeah, but I knew a little bit about them. But my era, if you add 20 to that, to the 1956 is 1976, which is when punk started in Britain, and I was a punk. And that movement was really crucial to me, and I think still informs me in the way I behave and the way I make films. And it's also meant that I missed Star Wars. Because, I mean, it is extraordinary, and you kind of, because everybody assumes in the business that you love Star Wars. And I said, I didn't see it. And they cannot believe that you haven't seen that movie. But actually,
I presume you saw The Great Rock and Roll Swindle, which came out around that time. Being a punk, you must have preferred that, no?
Well, the film that came out, of course, in '79 was Apocalypse Now. And that was my kind of filmmaking, rather than, and it's weird reading the books about George Lucas and Francis Ford Coppola and, you know, all those, reading about all those guys. And in fact, I went up for a job with, he's not here, is he? No, I didn't think he, I went up for a job with George Lucas, and he didn't give it me, because I think I forget, but I think I probably told him this same story I'm telling you now. It didn't go down very well. It was for the TV spin-off of Indiana Jones, I think. And I didn't get the job, so, you know, it was another, yeah, anyway, so you learn, you know.
But you started off doing some great directing in TV. You directed the greatest Inspector Morse episode, Masonic Mysteries, other things. But and you'd done other things before that. You were driving a truck, you were sweeping floors, so you've seen Apocalypse Now, you want to be a movie maker. How did you actually set about making that dream happen? I
wrote to a lot of people in the film industry, because I'd watched there was a cinema I come from Manchester in the north of England, and there was a cinema called the Avon Cinema in Hume, which used to show really daring European art movies. And I went there, as soon as I could try and get in, which is about 14, 15, I would go there and watch the movies. And so I was like kind of determined to be a filmmaker, but I didn't really know how to go about it. And I wrote to a few people and never heard back. And I ended up getting a job in the theatre with a theatre company called Joint Stock, and then they eventually became the Royal Court Theatre in London. And it's a wonderful training, really, I personally think, for a film director, because you get a respect for writing through the theatre, but you also get an intimacy and knowledge of actors, which bears you in. And you often find a lot of film directors, and they're not frightened of actors, but they don't understand them or they're wary of them. And in fact, they get you out of, especially when you're starting off, they get you out of so many corners. You know, if you have a good relationship with them, they can help you when you're behind, you know, and you've got 3 pages left to shoot and there's no time. They'll just do it for you, you know, and in one take. And there's so many different ways in which they help you. So I worked in the theatre and sort of trained started as an assistant stage manager, sweeping up and driving trucks and things like that. And then eventually they give you a training, you know, and you become a director. You start doing play readings and then eventually the youth theatre and things like that, and you make your way up eventually. And then I applied to the BBC in Northern Ireland. They had a job there as a producer, and it was a very tense time politically in Northern Ireland. There was a lot of violence. And they wouldn't appoint somebody from Northern Ireland because it was very, very contentious. They appointed an outsider to be the producer, and nobody else applied. I mean, seriously, I found that out. It was really tough time. But I knew people in Belfast, and it's a great place, Belfast. Even at the worst of times, it's a wonderful place to go. So actually, I got the job, and then when I got the job, I said, I'm also going to direct the films. But you won't have to pay me. We'll save the money on the directors because I'll direct them as well. And they were sort of a bit baffled by that, but they sort of went with it. And so I learned how to work with a camera. And it is true what Orson Welles says. Everything you need to know about a cameraman will teach you in an afternoon. It's then what you want to do with that knowledge, you know. Everything, not everything that cameramen know, but what a director needs to know about the camera, technically, you can pick up very, very quickly. And I was very fortunate there was a guy I think it was called Arthur Ellis, and he was a cameraman who'd worked in Vietnam. He'd been a BBC News cameraman in Vietnam. And he was right at the end of his career, and I learnt under him and a protege of his, a guy called Phil Dawson. And they taught me, and I made a series of small 1-hour films in BBC Northern Ireland.
And it eventually leads on to your first film, Shallow Grave. You use your knowledge of actors to introduce Ewan McGregor and Christopher Eccleston, give them their film breaks. You had a budget of £1 million. It turned out to be the best British film of the year and a huge success. Was it easy right from the start, or was it a nightmare making that film? What are your abiding memories?
It was. I'd done a number of TV things. A couple of things I was very proud of. A period thing called Mr. Rose Virgins, and the guy who'd written the script, John Hodge, who also wrote Trance, the new movie, and the producer, Andrew MacDonald, had seen that stuff, and they had this script called Shallow Grave, which they were looking for a director, and they were interviewing lots of directors, and I got an interview, and I was very honest. I said, it's ripped off from Blood Simple, isn't it? Which they weren't expecting. But it turned out to be true. It was absolutely true. It's inspired very, very closely by Blood Simple, certainly the tone of it. And so we started to get on very well, and we had £1 million, and that was it. And it was kind of like they wouldn't give us. I mean, we ran out of money at the end. We were selling off bits of furniture that we'd finished. If you've seen the film, there's really nice interiors. We spent a lot of the money on the interiors of these big interiors of these flats in Edinburgh. And as we finished with each sofa, we would sell it to a member of the crew and buy some more celluloid. Seriously, buy some more film stock so that we could keep shooting like that. So there is no experience quite like your first film. I mean, there's just nothing like it because you don't know what you're doing. And you really don't, and that is a wonderful place to be. Because I'm not a fan of... You know, the world we work in films is so technical and so manipulative that when people are experts at it, it can quickly become, without meaning to, it can quickly become a cynical exercise in making money or in creating effects and things like that. Whereas when you've no idea what you're doing, you're just cobbling it together. There's something wonderful about it, very special. There's a kind of innocence about it. And one of the reasons that we always try to do films that are slightly different to the last one. And that's partly trying to chase this dream of getting back to that state of not knowing what you're doing. you know, where you're discovering it as you make the film, rather than thinking, I know exactly how this should be, and setting off like that, yeah.
Well, you go for something very different after that, the definitive film of the generation, really, Trainspotting. So tell us how that sort of came to be, how the project found you, and how easy it was to pull it all together.
Well, this girl sent Andrew this book, which there was a couple of thousand copies of it in Scotland. And she sent it to him, and he read it, and he said, I think you should read it. And John Hodge, the screenwriter, read it, and I read it. And it is, if you've never read it, it is, for me, it's Ulysses. It's a modern Ulysses. You could make a dozen different films out of it. Ken Loach could make a certain type of film out of it. I mean, it's a wonderful book. Very, very, very special. And so we started work on it, and we wanted to capture the spirit of it rather than the literalness of it. And also, although the book is really about, factually, literally, it's about heroin addiction and coming on and off heroin in Edinburgh through a couple of decades, really, in a way. Actually, when we made the film, we made it more in the spirit of rave culture, which is because it was 95, 96, which was like the height of rave culture, of ecstasy culture in Britain. So the film, although it's about, I don't think films literally about heroin you can watch. They're unwatchable, because actually what happens is you take the stuff and you just sit in the corner for 12 hours, you know, until you need to go out and rob someone and so you can sit in the corner again. And so we made it's much more the spirit of a different drug, really, which was occupying Britain at the time. But it was also had something to say about that dealt with drugs in a very mature way, and actually said people aren't insane. The reasons they take drugs are not insanity. You know, these are not weak victims. They take them for other reasons, and we tried to capture that spirit in it, really. And it was, and we were very, very bold with it. We'd had a hit. Shallow Grave was a bit of a hit, not in America, by the way. It was a hit at home, and so that gave us the confidence to be very, very bold in some of the choices and decision making that we made. And we were bunch of Scottish actors, amazing Scottish actors, you know, and one English actor, Johnny Lee Miller, pretending to be Scottish, and they were fantastic. Yeah.
There's been talk recently of a Trainspotting sequel, maybe set 20 years later. Is that something that interests you?
Yeah, well, I don't know whether any of you know the Likely Lads. Do you remember the Likely Lads?
Classic.
And do you remember the follow-up, Whatever Happened to the Likely Lads? That's genius, that television. Because they just basically took them 10 years later. And we've always had this idea that because the actors and the characters are kind of indelibly marked in people's minds, people remember those characters' names. They come up to you and say, I loved Begbie, and I loved Spud, and Sick Boy, and Renton. And that's like, normally when you make films, you can never remember the characters' names, you know? So it's obviously made a mark, you know, and we thought, rather than make a quick sequel that would cash in and be a bit disappointing, we'd try and do something with it that was, that had a real reason to go back to it. And it would obviously be that these guys who have pushed their bodies to the absolute limit, when you're in your mid-20s, you know, when you can take all those risks, then they hit their 40s. You know, 20 years later, they hit their 40s. And what is it? What have they made of their lives? What's happened to them? It would feel like a really great way for the nation to come back together again and watch these guys at it 20 years later. And the problem has always been, actually, I think we could do it now, but the problem has always been that the actors don't age. You know, they look after themselves. They pretend, no, they do. They pretend that it's the Wild Bunch and they're out drinking all night and everything like that. They're not. They're in a spa at the weekends with cucumbers on their eyes, and they look like Dorian Gray. They're timeless. But we will be there waiting for them when they finally crack.
So you'd made a huge impact with Trainspotting. Hollywood came calling. I think you moved over here at that time. Tell us what your life was like after Trainspotting, all the offers that came in, and you had a difficult career decision, and then you went off and did A Life Less Ordinary. What was your life like at that time after that huge success?
Yeah, I mean, Hollywood is very, very sharp. I mean, it was even before Trainspotting. I remember we were in the editing room, kind of finishing, I think, doing something to the end of Shallow Grave, and there was a phone call, and it was Sharon Stone on the phone. You know, for a young guy, and Sharon Stone rings up, it's just like, you know, you can see how easily your head gets turned. And people would ring up, very, very sharp people who are, watch what they see as emerging talent and want to use it. And so after Trainspotting, I got involved briefly with the fourth Alien film, which is a wonderful script by Joss Whedon. And I loved the Alien movies. I really loved them. And but I realized very quickly that I couldn't really do it. I wouldn't know how to handle it. And I kind of had to back out of it. And we went on, so following the huge success of Trainspotting, we went on to make our huge flop, which is called A Life Less Ordinary, which was like nobody liked at all. And yeah, I did too. I quite like it. I quite like it. And actually, I have to tell you, so do people in Belgium. Because there's a rule in filmmaking that when you have a big hit, there's always one territory where it doesn't work. And thankfully, conversely, the opposite applies, that when you have a flop, there's always one territory where for some reason it does work. And it was #1 in Belgium for 3 weeks. Thank you, Belgium, and you.
Your next film was The Beach, and that starred that great Hollywood leading man Leonardo DiCaprio. Now, he's known for being very supportive of his directors. What was your experience working with Leo?
It was extraordinary because he'd just come off Titanic. I remember walking down the street with him as we'd taken over this street in Phuket in Thailand for this sequence. I remember walking down the street with him. I'd never seen people looking at another human being in the way that these people looked at him. I mean, it was like you were walking down the street with the Second Coming, with Jesus. I mean, it was the look on people's face. I mean, the pressure that must put him under is extraordinary. And he is a wonderful guy. I remember the film's not... Yeah, I wasn't particularly happy with the film, and I think he sensed that. And he took me aside at one point, and he said, if you want to reshoot all this, I'll just tell him, we can just... This is right towards the end of the filming. He said, we can go and reshoot all this if you want. I think he had that kind of influence and power. He knew he was always with power. And he tries to use it in a good way, and do good and interesting work. And he's always done that. And I admire him very, very much for that, yeah.
What did you learn from that experience on the beach that's made you a better filmmaker going forward?
Big time. What we did, and it's really interesting, you didn't realize, I knew something was wrong at the time, and it's only subsequently and I analysed it and understood. We went there like an old colonial army. We took 200 people from Pinewood, from the British, the British film industry, marched into Thailand with their per diems, and kind of like, this is going to take, how long are they shooting for? 3 months? Yeah, this will take 4 or 5 months. We'll sit by the pool. And we walked in like that, and it is really, you can no longer do that, I think. I mean, you can, obviously, there's certain films do that, but I think for certainly the kind of filmmaker I am and the people I work with and the kind of films we make, it's the wrong way to go about it. And when we did Slumdog Millionaire, Christian Colson, the producer, sent me the script, and I knew that the way to do it is that we should take very few people. And we took 8 people to Mumbai with us. Now, it's a lot easier to do in Mumbai because there's a huge film industry there, but I'd learned from the beach that you go there and you make the film, you don't impose yourself on the local culture, you try and emerge as much as you can from the local culture. And so it was a big factor in the success of Slumdog, the lessons that we'd learned on the beach, for sure.
You're such a versatile filmmaker. Next, you move on to tackle zombies in 28 Days Later. Wonderful film. And you mentioned very few people before. The iconic image of that film is just Cillian Murphy just walking through a deserted London. We've all been to London and know it's the most crowded city on earth. How did you do that?
Well, we were very lucky because we did it in July, before 9/11, before September. So cities were different. I mean, they've changed, obviously, because of 9/11. I don't think you could do it now, but we would get up in the morning, like at 4 a.m., and go and sometimes with permission and sometimes not permission, and we'd try and film. If the sun came up, and we were very lucky it did, we'd film for an hour before the traffic became unmanageable. And we brought along a lot. Again, this was just fortuitous. We hired a lot of students to be traffic marshals, because unless you're on a huge movie, they won't stop the traffic for you. You can't hire the cops in Britain. So that they'll be there in case there's any trouble, but they won't actually stop the traffic. But they'll let you have traffic marshals with the yellow fluorescent jackets on to kind of ask the traffic to stop politely. You can't stop it, you can just ask. And so we took, on the first day, what happened is that a load of girl students turned up, and really pretty ones. And it was really hot summer, and they weren't wearing very much. And all the cars at that time of the morning are driven by blokes. It's just one of the rules of nature, I'm afraid. And these girls would lean into these cars and say, "Would you mind terribly just waiting here for a few minutes?" And you could see, we saw it works. So the next day, of course, we hired more and more models, and and that was how we got that footage, really. We used a lot of small digital cameras as well, which was the early days of digital cameras, so that he could walk across Westminster Bridge once, but we'd have 10 cameras on it that you can run for an hour, and because they're just the little domestic tapes, really. And then you could pace the walk across the bridge as though it was taking all day. You know, it was just. And yet, in fact, you only walked across it once, because you could only stop the traffic for that once. So we were very fortunate, really. But when we came to shoot the rest of the film a couple of months later, because we did this as a pre-shoot, that sequence, then 9/11 happened, and you could feel it changed, and it changed the film, actually, because the film became, I think, much more about, and I think it's one of the reasons it was a success, particularly here, where it was a huge success for such a film. And I think it was because it was the first film out that addressed the vulnerability of cities, how cities suddenly felt vulnerable. I mean, in a different way, it was because it was empty and you didn't know what was in it, but cities which, just seemed impregnable and suddenly felt vulnerable, to an enemy, to an attack, to a danger. And I think that helped the film resonate amongst people,
You didn't do the sequel. You went on to make the charming film Millions. Some wonderful child performances in that. How does directing children compare with directing movie stars?
Well, we were very lucky because we got these two kids. I don't know if you've seen the film. There's a little kid in it. There's two brothers. And there's a little kid in it who's just one of those guys. He's like that little girl in Beasts of the Southern Wild. You just cannot. You can't tell them how to act. They just know. And we just used to stand back and let him at it, and we were very fortunate getting it like that. So you have to be, they are extraordinary, because of course I'm an enthusiast. Every time we do, especially with kids, I thought, you do a take, I'd say, excellent, really good. And we're going to do it again. And they go, why? You just said it was excellent. Why would you want to do that again? So you have to go through that process with them. But they were lovely. And we should have, if we'd had a bit more confidence, we'd have done it. Because Frank Cottrell Boyce, the writer, and we talked about, we wanted to make it as a musical, really. And it would be a perfect musical. It really would. On the scale of Once, it would be a very small, very intimate musical where people just sang to you. It would be beautiful. And we didn't quite have enough confidence to push that through. We were going to try and get Noel Gallagher to write the songs. And we kind of thought, and we never quite went for it like that. And it's a shame. We should have done, yeah.
Next, now you never got to be into Star Wars, but next you make your own space epic, Sunshine. And one pattern that's just emerged in this conversation, all these different genres, has that been a deliberate choice as you build your career?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's that as I said at the beginning, you're trying to get back to an innocence where there's something wonderful about having to research a particular genre, or a particular world of films, and it's very narrow. Space films are very narrow. There's a wonder about doing that. And also there's an attempt to make yourself feel that innocence again, about feeling like a blank sheet of paper. Like, how do we do that? Space is very difficult, and it is interesting. Unless there are huge franchises involved, very few people make a second space movie, because they are tough to make. Goodness me. That thing of gravity, the lack of gravity, just trying to achieve that in a gravity world is like an absolute nightmare. It drives you mad, and it's your fault because your taste, you've been brought up to expect certain things, and if they're any different, you just dismiss it. Audiences just go, "No, that's not right," and it's Kubrick's fault, of course, originally, because things in space do not happen in slow motion. If you watch the guys on the space station, they move really quickly. It's just there's no resistance. But if you do it like that and put it up there, you think it's stupid. That's really badly done. But that's actually what it's like. But because Kubrick did that, which is his way of doing gravity, suggesting gravity in a gravity-free in a gravity world, that set the template for it. And you are literally in a narrow corridor, and you keep bumping into people like Kubrick, and Ridley Scott. You can't help but bump into them. Because there's not that many stories in space. Unless you're doing fantasy stuff like Star Wars, there's not that many stories in space yet, because we've hardly been there. So we have and they basically there is one story they break down to, which is they pick up a signal from somewhere, which is in Sunshine, and it's virtually all space movies, they pick up a signal. And that's the kind of, and it's really weird, it's true as well, you know, so and you bump into all them, so, yeah.
Then you come down to earth for your greatest triumph to date, Slumdog Millionaire. So tell us how you... Thank you. Yes, quite right too. How did you discover and shepherd the project, first of all?
I didn't. So Christian Coulson, you should stand up and take a bow.
Yeah, take a
Come
bow,
on, Christian.
Yeah.
You got the Pope.
Oh, look at the modesty.
You're the producer of
There we
Slumdog
go.
Millionaire. It's like win-win.
Christian Coulson, ladies and gentlemen.
No, he sent me the script, and my agent in London said, it's a script about Who Wants to Be a Millionaire. And I thought, I don't want to make a film about the game show about, I don't know if you know it in Britain, it's done by this guy, Chris Tarrant. I thought, I don't want to make a film with Chris Tarrant in it. And then I saw the name on the front of the script, and it was Simon Beaufoy, and I knew, obviously, he'd written Full Monty. And I thought, and this is the God's honest truth, I thought, I'll read a bit of it, because if I ever meet him, I want to be able to pretend it seemed like I'd read the whole thing and it wasn't my cup of tea or whatever. And I read it and I started it, and there's a God's honest truth, and it was got 10 pages in, and I knew we were going to make it. You just knew. And Christian and I met, we just shook hands. We didn't do a deal, we just said, let's make this. And it is amazing the way that you get transformed by something, an experience of something. And Simon had been to Mumbai to research the writing of it, and he'd ripped apart the original novel and made it his own. I mean, it's an adapted screenplay, but it's not really. It's a bit like John Hodges' Trainspotting. It's based on a book, but it's not really. It's a work of imagination inspired by an idea. And so we went off to make it with our 8 people. We took 8 people and went off to make it, and had the most extraordinary experience of that city. If you've never been, it is one of the wonders of the world. It's not for everyone, but all life is there. And for a filmmaker, you just cannot believe what you're being given free every day. And I couldn't, and Christian had to literally close the bank accounts and drag me away at the end, because you can't stop. It's incomplete. Every day you can just film new stuff and new ideas. It's an amazing place, it really is.
It sounds like the filmmaking experience was reward enough, but then you have this amazing international box office success and all the awards attention, riding your way to 8 Oscars. Just talk us about your headspace while all this was happening.
Well, we were very good, actually, because we'd made the film. It'd been tough making the film because we'd been abandoned and, you know, finance problems and everything like that. But we'd stuck together as a bunch of people, and we kept to that, very much to that feeling of sticking together, and we didn't let our heads be turned. And I think, you know, obviously we were an age where you know not to let your head be turned, and we stuck together really, and it was a journey that we were all on the whole time. And we put some things in place to look after there were 2 of the kids who came from very poor backgrounds, and we'd already put in place a trust to make sure that they got some education and that they had somewhere half decent to live and stuff like that. So we'd done everything really, so that when, you know, its profile starts to rise and people start to ask questions, we felt very comfortable that we'd behave very well, and what would be, you know, and it was Searchlight, really. I mean, Pathé, we have a deal with Searchlight in America and Pathé in Europe. And Pathé stuck by us right at the beginning when it was very, very tough. So you feel a great loyalty to them because of that. But Searchlight were extraordinary, the way they drove the film. And Angela Johnson, who's here tonight, I remember we were in Telluride. We had this screening in Telluride. It was like the first screening of it. And it was like suddenly it began to take off a bit, you know, and they put on extra screenings and everything like that. And we were hurrying from one screening to another screening. And it's very high up Telluride. So if you're hurrying anywhere, you're out of breath. And we were like panting. And she said, panting away, she said, you know, I think if we keep going, we may be able. I'm going to work so hard to get us an adapted screenplay nomination. Like that. And that was the first time it was ever mentioned. Angela mentioned it. And she's brilliant at it. She's secured amazing number of adapted screenplay nominations in her career for different films through Searchlight. And you need a team around you. I mean, you guys know this. You need a huge team because it becomes an enormous operation. But we kept this simplicity and good faith at the center of it, or we tried to, with each other and the way that we met the world and spoke to the world about the film.
You and your team then went on to make another hugely acclaimed movie, 127 Hours. So what really spoke to you about that material? What appealed to you about the story?
I'd read the book. I'd read his book, Between a Rock and a Hard Place, a few years earlier. It was given to me by Francois Invenal, who runs Pathé and is a climber himself. And I love climbing books. I don't climb, but I love the climbing books. Like the Joel Simpson books are amazing, I think. Recommend them hugely. And I'd always had this idea that it was an action movie where the hero can't move. And I love that dichotomy. And whenever I read the book, it felt like that. It was so, and yet he couldn't move. And it was going to be very difficult because you approach studios and say, yeah, the film's about a guy who can't move for 6 days, and then the climax is he cuts his arm off. And that's not going to be an easy sell. So we just cashed in. You get a chance with a success like Slumdog. You get a chance to play your Joker, really. And it was our Joker that we played, really. And fortunately, they let us make it, and we got Franco, who gives an amazing performance, and the film kind of found an audience. Not a huge audience, but it did find a decent audience, so we were very pleased to represent that story, yeah.
You returned to the theatre, to the National Theatre, for that incredible performance of Frankenstein, which was shown around the world in cinemas with Benedict Cumberbatch and Johnny Lee Miller again. So having sort of come from film and had that luxury of, if it doesn't work, let's do another take, how was it to return to the theatre where it's just, you don't have the safety net of a second take?
No, obviously I'd worked in the theatre before, but a long time ago, like 15, 16 years before, and I was a bit worried it would be very rusty. But we set it up to make it while we were making the Olympics. The Olympics is a 2-year job, and we took 2 sabbaticals, one of which we did this theatre play, Frankenstein, and another one was where we shot Trance and in the second sabbatical. But what you learn is that the actors are the storytellers, really. Because in film, you're the storyteller. You hire the actors for a bit, and even if they're super famous, and even if they're the reason that your film is financed, you still say thanks to them, and they go away, and you take over the film. And it's the reverse in theatre. What you're doing is you're, in the rehearsal, you're just fueling the actors. You're preparing them for the run of the story when they tell the story to an audience every night. It's a completely different discipline, really. And you have to, and I remember that feeling. It's a very weird feeling where they push you away. Because as soon as they get in front of an audience, and then you start giving them notes, which they ask for, and you give them the note, and they say, well, with respect. They always use that phrase. and they basically just push you away, and you drift away. You know, they've done with you. They've used you up. Whereas in fact, on a film, it's the opposite. You're using actors up, you know, in order to create your images that you then use in the editing. So but we were great. I mean, we were very lucky. Those 2 are fantastic actors, very different. They both ended up doing Sherlock Holmes. Some kind of bizarre, kind of like how that works, I have no idea. But they got on really well, and they put on and we switched them each night. They would switch.
Was that your idea or theirs?
Yeah, no, it was something that I wanted, because it's an obvious thing that one of the themes of her story, Mary Shelley's story, is that obviously it's the beginning of science. It's the early days of science, when she could see that scientists were replacing God, that they were on this route, this path to actually going, no, we don't need to worry about the creator anymore. We can create. And so it's a creator and his created thing. And so they felt like 2 sides of the same coin. So it felt like a lovely switch to do that like that. A bit of a nightmare for them, remembering lines, because you could hear them sometimes get the wrong line. They'd say the line of the creature as the doctor, and you could see them look at each other and go, oh, no, that's wrong. How are we going to get back? And they have to work it out and get back to it. You know, it's very bizarre.
So let's turn now to your organisation of the Olympics opening ceremony, a wonderful thing. But how do you even start with something as globally significant and huge as that? What was your starting point?
Well, it was, I mean, I lived near the stadium, and I was very proud when we got the games at Singapore. And I thought that would be great for the East End, because the guy who, I mean, you heard about the London Mayor Boris Johnson, but the mayor before him, Ken Livingstone, was very pivotal in actually using the Olympics as a way to regenerate an area of East London. And I was very, very proud to be associated with that. And I'm a mad sports fan. a mad Olympics fan. I'd missed the Commonwealth Games in Manchester in 2002 because I was away filming, so I said yes straight away. I didn't really think about it, to be honest. And we set up. We got a bunch of us together, just like you do a film. You know, we've got a writer, a producer, and we just sat in and designers. Actually, a designer from here, Sutterat Lalab, who was a child at the 1984 Los Angeles Olympics. The designer of whom is here, I believe, tonight. Is that not right? Anyway, and she was a child who held one of the cards at Los Angeles, and that was really interesting because she talked about how that had stayed with her whole life, you know, that experience. And so we built it out of all these people. She was the outsider. The rest of us were British. It was great having an outsider who loved British culture but was an outsider and able to warn us when we were getting too parochial. And we built it like that, really. We built it over, and again we used the Slumdog success to make sure that people couldn't interfere with us too much, because there is a corporate side to it that does kind of homogenize it dangerously at times, and we were able to keep them away by basically threatening to resign, you know, and they are very concerned about newspaper headlines, obviously, so they're thinking, oh, shall we let him resign, or should we let him, oh no, all right, we'll let him get on with it then, you know, so you have to threaten to resign a few times, but otherwise it was good, yeah.
And what's been the reaction like when you walk through East London? I mean, how has it sort of touched your heart to have the gratitude of the people?
No, it isn't like that really. It's funny actually. It's funny. I am not pretending to be modest. I suffer from ego just as much as anybody else about the films and about the theatre plays, and you know, good reviews are great and bad reviews are awful and all that kind of stuff. But this was different. This didn't feel like that at all, and people do come up, and they're very complimentary, but you can sense from them, and something that we felt, which is that this was a job we were doing on everybody's behalf. It wasn't a kind of like something that we should get a badge for. It was actually, this was our job. We were the right people to do it at the right time, and thanks to their involvement, all the volunteers and everybody, we made a decent job of it. And so people come up and they stop you and go, good, well done. Like that, and then they walk away. They don't want an autograph, they don't want a picture, they just want to go, yeah, that was all right, that good. And so it's like, and it's a mixture of relief, I think, as well, because I think everybody was expecting it to be terrible. So there's a lot of relief in there as well as liking it. Yeah.
Well, your other project in East London is your latest movie, Trance, all shot there, which I had the pleasure of seeing yesterday and is fantastic. I don't want to say anything about the storyline at all because I just want people to have the same experience I had, sort of not going in. So I'll just leave it to you. What do you want to tell us about Trance?
Well, we were a bit. So we shot Trance while we were preparing the Olympics, and then we edited it after we'd finished the Olympics, and it's set in London. And this is the American poster. And which is alarming, I guarantee. I admit, but we wanted to. It was very clear early on that there was a danger that everybody thought that what we did after the Olympics and after Slumdog Millionaire and 127 Hours, which are redemptive films, really, that people might think this new film would be a close relative of those projects, you know, and the next one in line. So, but actually, it's much more like the evil twin of the Olympic Games, and we wanted a poster that warned people about that, that you weren't coming to see some karmic good fortune that you might sum up in Slumdog Millionaire. It's a psychological thriller, and it's about this auctioneer, James McAvoy, who is involved in the robbery of a painting from his own auction house. And he double-crosses the gang who he's organised the robbery with. And he receives a blow on the head, and he claims he has amnesia about where the painting actually went. Nobody can find the painting. So it's got this idea in it. It's got a kind of arts heist element. It's got an amnesia element. And then they turn to Harley Street, to a hypnotherapist, played by Rosario Dawson, to see if she can get inside his memories to find out where it is. So it's got this, and she begins to behave like a femme fatale. She appears to be able to manipulate the men. So it's got these three tropes going of kind of heist movie. I love heist movies, amnesia movies, love those kind of things. And femme fatale, love those. But it's none of those things really. They are MacGuffins. They are MacGuffins. It's not really about a stolen painting. It's actually about stolen memories. It's not really about amnesia. It's actually about, in fact, somebody in the film says amnesia is bollocks. We all know that. Amnesia is bollocks. It's just used in feature films. And it's actually about forgetting as a behavioral choice. It's about denial and repression. And it's not really a femme fatale in the classic sense. There's a story that you eventually discover that is more interesting than just the classic idea of the femme fatale. So, but if I tell you any more than that, the idea of the film, it's very difficult these days with Twitter and everything like that, but you want people to go in and know nothing about it really, and start to root for one character, which is part of the game, because it's a three-hander, and who's the antagonist and who's the protagonist does change and vary and come and go. So I hope you can see it and enjoy it. Yeah,
it's certainly a film no one who sees it will ever forget. We'll be seeing for good reasons. We'll be seeing a trailer at the end of the evening. But now we'd like to invite your questions for Danny. So if you have a question, please raise your hand. I'll take them in the order that I see them. And there's a roving microphone. So just going to go to the lady at the back, 2 rows from the back there.
Hello. What does it mean to have the freedom of your hometown? How has your life changed?
Are you from there?
No, I'm from Romford.
You're from where? Romford. Oh, Underworld. Underworld were based in Romford. Absolutely. No, I've got what she's referring to is I come from a little place outside Manchester called Radcliffe, and the big town near us is Bury, and they're my football team that I support. And there's also a group from there called Elbow. I don't know whether you know Elbow. A really lovely, great band. And we were given, after Slumdog and after the Elbow's album won the Mercury Music Prize, we were given the freedom of the city. And what it means is that you can graze sheep on common land, really, which I haven't tried yet, but it's always there, when the career dries up, you can go to do that. So that's basically what it means.
Hi, Danny. Thanks for some great films. And I'm really looking forward to the next one. What is the next genre that you're looking at that's going to keep you surprised and naive?
Well, no, we're working on a couple of, weirdly, without deliberately doing this, again, this is a good sign because they sort of creep up on you. The best ones creep up on you. We're working on a couple of period films at the moment, actually, which are at script stage at the moment. So we're developing them at script stage at the moment. So that's intriguing and challenging and interesting. It'll create lots of budget problems, and I like a ceiling. I like having a limitation of not having quite enough money, because I think it does make you inventive, and I think there is a danger in the world, the very lucky world we move in, is that if you do end up with a lot of money, you can end up wasting a lot of it as well. So I like the discipline of kind of pushing at the ceiling. And we always try and make them look like $100 million, but they actually cost less than 20. That's usually which is a lot of money. It's a lot of money anyway. So we try and make it look like an even more money. But yeah, a couple of period films we're working on at the moment. Yeah.
Hello. When you look at a script, a lot of your scripts or your films have some very dramatic moments, but yet they have action and comedy and music and fantasy. As far as pace and tone, is that something before you direct and this very dramatic scene of a baby dying in a crib is going to be there, can you talk about that, how you deal with very dramatic scenes, and will 28 months later ever happen?
Oh, right. So obviously the basis of most films, we don't make abstract films, but we try and make extreme films. So you do base them on realism. There is a realistic basis to it, but you try and kind of stretch that realism so it hums. That's what we always say. So it's really, tight and throbbing, really, in a way. You can, and that helps you then develop it into fantasy, into surreal, there's an image in Trance you'll see, which is an example of that, where you try and push things as far as you dare, really. Someone said that that common sense is easy to admire but difficult to love. And I always think that about realism. You know, it's kind of like you nod and go, yeah, but to love something, you want to push it further. And that's not necessarily style. It can be just the story or the acting, but there's something special about it. You're always pushing to. There's got to be a reason why. You know, there's got to be a reason why people. You've got to have a reason why people will come out and sit in a dark room and watch your film. You know, and I feel that obligation very, very strongly. So I want to give them something that pushes boundaries as much as possible, and yet doesn't become abstract, doesn't become exclusive or excluding, really. 28. A third part of the kind of 28 days later thing is a possibility. Yes, certainly. It's we've got an idea. Whether it will actually happen depends on so many different things. I don't know. We'll see, though. Yeah.
Hi, Danny. Thanks for tonight. It's been great. This is quite a big question, but. What do you see? How do you see the British film industry in 2013, and where's it going?
I mean, I always say the same thing, really, which I shouldn't. I know, because you know, something like BAFTA and the work that's done is really important. I don't believe it's our natural art form. Is the honest truth. I think I've been very lucky to work in America and to work in France and to work in India. And those three countries, it is their art form. You can feel it off them. They live and breathe it. It's like in their DNA. It's just like, and it's not quite like that with us. We throw up occasional films and there's always the British are coming moment, you know. But it's, you know, the hard evidence tells you it's just temporary. It's a spike, you know, and we settle back down again. And we do amazing stuff when you think about the Bonds and the Potters. You know, it's not without its glory, you know, really true glory, you know. But it's not our natural art form. I personally think music is, and I think television is, in a way, and theatre, really. They're more, partly because television grew from a national broadcaster. So it was something that the whole country felt very strongly. And indeed, our relationship with the BBC as a nation is something that it'll be really interesting to see whether we hang on to it, you know, with all the contenders and alternatives there are at the moment. But it is embedded in the national consciousness in a way that I'm not sure film is. Music, we are the best in the world at. I'm sorry, there's just nobody can compete. This little country keeps producing this, and it's not slavish music that's following fashion. It's setting trends. It's idiosyncratic. It's peculiar. And it's because I think if you're young and talented, you just get together with some mates and start making music, and you get these amazing. And I've been very lucky to benefit from that because we put a lot of it in the films. And so I think and then our theatre background, of course, is something that we're also very good at. And I think that it's more that than the film. So I think we'll keep trundling along is the honest answer. I don't think there's anything to worry about, but I don't think we should imagine there's going to be some new dawn. Maybe there will be, could be wrong, you know. I mean, we might throw up an amazing bunch of filmmakers who will literally dominate the world, but I don't think we will, because I think they'll come from these countries where it really, really matters to them. Film really, really matters to them. It's just their opinion anyway.
My question is sort of related to artistic collective consciousness. Specifically, in the last few months, there were a slew of films about Lincoln. Very recently, there's been a number of stage adaptations of Trainspotting. In Chicago, there was one at the end of the year, which sort of Americanized Harry Gibson's play. And there's a version going on now here in Hollywood, of which I'm a part. And I wanted to know if you had ever thought about directing the stage version of Trainspotting, especially now with talk of, you know, porno, the sequel, and how you felt about our collective consciousness.
So the question was about thinking about doing a Trainspotting stage play. In fact, before we did the film, there was a stage play. There was a stage version of it, and we went to see it. And a couple of the people, and Ewan Bremner, who plays Spud in the movie, played Renton in the stage adaptation. And that was one of the big questions, is we didn't want him to play Renton in the film, we wanted him to play Spud. And he was amazingly gracious the way he accepted that, because that must have been tough for him to do that. And there was another girl in it, Susan Vidler, who ends up in the film as well, who's the mother of the baby that dies in the... So I'd seen it on the stage, and so I guess no, I think that our concentration will be on this sequel idea to the, you know, with those same actors in the same parts, but with 20 years of hard life on them, you know. And Begbie will have been in prison, and you know, I think that's what we'll concentrate on, I think.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Could you talk about your creative process, and do you have pretty much a same process you use across the genres you work in? Pretty much almost before you film, how you develop the story and how you develop the show you're going to do.
Well, I'm not. I mean, I've done a little bit of writing, but I'm not a writer, and I kind of know that actually, because So when we were doing 127 hours, because it was a very weird film, nobody could. Christian and I sent it to a number of writers, friends of ours, and they said, "Don't think so," and so. Christian said, "Well, you should do it," and I said, "Well, I'll have a go," and I did a kind of 40-page sort of outline of it, and I thought it was really good. I was like, "Oh, see, I told you I had an ego." It's like, "Oh, that's quite good." And then Christian said, "Yeah, well, okay, well, let's send it to a proper writer now," and that was a blow, but you know, you live with it. And but no, we sent it to Simon Beaufoy, who wrote Slumdog Millionaire and is a climber himself. And it was amazing when the script came back, because I learned what writers do. Because I can do kind of structure and the pyrotechnics and stuff like that, and the dynamism of it. But what he did was, and it was so simple what he'd done, he just did character. And I hadn't done character. And I realized I rely on the writer and actors to bring character in. And I encourage them and support them in that. But I don't do it. And I don't quite know how to do it either. And it's effortless for him. Effortless. He just brought character into it. And it seems weird that you're doing a one-man film and there's no character there. But that's what it was like until Simon came in. So I mean, I can do a bit of it, but I'm not really, and I love trying to inspire writers, but I'm not really a writer. My process is more visual, really. And what I do, and I say this to, and I still don't think enough people do it, is we create a kind of Bible of images for each film, so that there's a visual language to look at. And because otherwise you just talk. You've got a script, which is words, and you end up just talking about stuff. And we try and have a silent kind of landscape as well, which is just images to look at, you know, some of which can be just silly things, some of which can be specific. You want something to look exactly like that, you know, and they can be from movies, from magazines, from great artwork. They can be from everywhere, you know, from people's own personal photographs. And we try and build a visual dynamic out of these images for use in the film, you know. And I love that part of the process. I really do. In terms of the British films, I don't think we're visual enough. I think that's a criticism I would make of us. I think that the obligation of this extraordinary idea of people coming to a dark room and watching a 40-foot screen is there is a visual imperative that you have to kind of work towards always. So that's I suppose the key moment, other than what the screenwriter gives you, obviously.
Danny, thank you for tonight. You know, going back to your favorite movie, Apocalypse,
yeah.
It was famously problematic to make. You know, Martin Sheen had a heart attack. Brando wanted to kill Dennis Hopper. Is there a creativity in chaos? Does that ever work for you in making a film?
Yeah, I mean, we had our own. It pales by comparison to obviously that movie, but we had a kind of similar chaotic thing in India, really, which was truly inspiring. It's so overwhelming, India. But, I mean, obviously, a film director, you're a control freak. That's basically what you're doing. You're trying to control things and get what you want. And when you meet Mumbai, you realize you're just going to have to go with it. You know, you can't go, whoa, stop there. We just want to have another shot of that right now, because it's a wave of constant change and motion and energy, and you've got to ride with it, really, and take from it what you can. And that was our chaos. It's that Blake thing. Energy is eternal delight, but it's chaotic, you know. And that was certainly what that was our biggest experience of it, for sure, you know. And I learned a huge amount by doing that. But yeah, no, I mean, I love her documentary about Apocalypse Now, and I love reading about it and all the stories. It's just amazing.
And you've created your own film classics, and we're excited about so many more to come. Ladies and gentlemen, Danny Boyle.